Mornings in Maplewood always start gently, warm sunlight filtering through the curtains, sparrows chirping outside the windows, and the smell of fresh coffee wafting through the small kitchen. I sit there listening to old jazz on Henry's radio, my partner who left me years ago, but whose presence still lingers throughout the house. At 63, I've lived nearly my entire life in this gentle town, where every corner and every door is as familiar as the back of my hand. I'm called Winnie, a nickname the town has given me as a sign of enduring commitment. I own Thorne's Home Essentials, the small hardware store Henry and I built in our humble beginnings. Now I run it alone, slowly but steadily. My days are simple, making coffee, greeting regulars, and managing things with a self-reliance honed by time and loss. My life may be quiet, but it's filled with small joys that I treasure. But deep inside me, there was a void of loneliness that nothing could fill. I had an only son, Ethan, a child who had been my greatest pride. Ethan grew up, married Lila, and moved to a big city, pursuing his own ambitions. I always believed that my son would be successful and live a good life. But then, fate took a different turn. Ethan lost his job, and we both decided to move back to Maplewood, temporarily living in the very house I had worked so hard to preserve. It seemed like a comfort, a chance for me to be closer to my son. But the reality was far from what I expected. Ethan grew more distant. The calls became less frequent, and each time they did, they were always about the same thing, money or items from my store. I began to wonder, was I being too sensitive, or had I only seen what I wanted to see in my son over the years? Was there something darker behind his indifferent exterior? My motherly instincts told me that something was wrong, but I tried to push my worries aside, telling myself that he was just going through a difficult time and would find himself again soon. Until one afternoon, an afternoon that made me both expectant and uneasy, it happened. As I was watering the geraniums blooming on the porch, the phone rang. It was Ethan. His voice, colder and more distant than ever, made my heart clench. "Mom, I want to see you tonight. I have something serious to tell you." That short sentence was like a silent knife stabbing deep into my chest. He didn't ask about my mother's health, didn't utter a friendly word, just ordered a meeting. Dry, without explanation. The uneasiness in me flared up fiercely. What did Ethan want? Did he really care about me, or did he have other plans? I suddenly remembered the gaze of Lila, my daughter-in-law. Always cold, cautious, lacking the minimum warmth between relatives. That image kept lingering in my mind, making my heart even heavier. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Each question seemed to drill deep into my mind. What was Ethan thinking? Did he really need me, or just what I possessed? And would I, a woman who had experienced many storms, be strong enough to face the truth that was quietly revealed? I felt like I was standing at a dark crossroads of life, where trust and doubt were fiercely struggling. I didn't know what was waiting for me ahead, but I knew I had to stay sober to face it, even if that meant accepting a harsh truth that my heart was never ready for. The next morning, I woke up at 5:30 a.m., a habit that had been ingrained in my life for decades. Despite a restless night, the dawn still crept through the curtains as usual, gentle and quiet. But today, it no longer carried the familiar serenity. The smell of coffee still lingered in the kitchen. The sparrows still chirped on the windowsill. But inside me, an undercurrent of unease was quietly rising. I tried to push away the dark thoughts, telling myself that today I had to be strong. At 7:30 a.m. sharp, I arrived at Thorne's Home Essentials, the familiar store that I consider a second home. The atmosphere in the store was the same. Shelves were neatly arranged, household items gleaming under soft lighting. I began my daily work, checking the goods, adjusting the display, cleaning every corner. Each item here evoked a piece of memory, a story. Like that jade green kettle. I still remember that Mrs. Helen Carter chose it as a birthday present for her niece when she turned 18. Or the stainless steel cutlery set. A young couple bought it as the beginning of their marriage journey. I love this job not only because of the commitment, but also because of the simple everyday stories it contains. Helen Carter, silver-haired, ever gentle, entered the store, her eyes scanning the shelves before settling on me. "Hi, Winnie. Your store is as cozy as ever," she said. "You always remember what kind of teapot I like and only pick out the best. You're so thoughtful." Her sincere compliment made me smile, a smile that came from deep within. Moments like these made me feel like my life mattered. I still remember every little detail about each customer, their preferences, the stories they told, the items they bought. This wasn't just a place to shop. It was a bridge connecting me to the beloved community of Maplewood. Sitting down on the old wooden chair behind the counter, I opened the daily sales book. The numbers appeared, but my mind drifted back 30 years to the day Henry and I first opened the small doors of this shop. We were young, full of dreams and faith. Henry, the man who always stood by me with trusting eyes, a kind heart, and a sharp business mind. Together, we built this shop from scratch, step by step, turning it into an indispensable part of the town. 8 years ago, Henry passed away after a long battle with cancer. My world suddenly became silent, as if the light had been extinguished. I thought I would never recover. But because of Henry, because of the memories between us, because of the love I had for this place, I continued. I ran the store alone, learned to cope with every challenge, persevered through each storm. I am proud of my perseverance, proud of not losing sight of what was most important. This store is not just a place to make a living. It is a legacy of love, a vestige of the marriage I once had with Henry. But sometimes that pride leaves me with an indescribable silence. Ethan, my son, never seemed to really care about this store. He didn't ask, wasn't curious, didn't share any memories of the values his parents had worked so hard to build. Every time I tried to talk, Ethan would decline because he was busy, or sometimes, worse, react with heartbreaking indifference. He didn't understand, or perhaps didn't want to understand, that Thorne's Home Essentials was more than just a brick and mortar, but a part of my life. I used to dream that one day, Ethan would take over the store, continuing his parents' work with pride. But that day seemed further and further away. That dream is now just a faint shadow. And in the quiet afternoons at the cashier counter, I felt a deep sadness, the sadness of a mother witnessing the indifference of the child in whom she had placed all her hopes. That night, my familiar home suddenly turned into a strange space, no longer the familiar peaceful place that I had always loved. A quiet, dense air seeped into every corner as Ethan and Lila stepped through the door, causing my heart to suddenly contract. I tried to lift the corners of my lips, hoping to cling to a bit of the old normalcy, but the smile that emerged was only a distorted and forced shadow of myself. Ethan sat quietly on the sofa, his face as tense as a bowstring, while Lila, despite her friendly demeanor, had a coldness in her eyes that made my heart ache, a coldness that could not be heard. "Mom, Lila and I have thought it over," Ethan said, his voice flat and hollow. "You are getting old. The store is beyond your ability. You should retire and enjoy your old age." I was stunned. Retirement? Thorne's Home Essentials was more than just a store. It was my soul, what remained of Henry, everything I had preserved with blood, tears, and love. How could I let go? Lila continued, her voice as sweet as sugar, but every word she spoke sent shivers down my spine. "Yes, Winnie, we understand you've worked hard all these years. It's time for you to rest. Let us take care of your finances so you don't have to worry about anything anymore. We'll manage your assets and make sure you live a comfortable life." Lila's words were like honey, but the bitter taste spread throughout me. Since when did the two of them become so caring about me? Especially Lila, who had never asked me, never spent a single afternoon with me, now seemed strangely caring. Her eyes, though cleverly hidden, still shone with a cold calculation, the eyes of someone who had learned to measure other people's emotions. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my voice steady. "What are you implying? I can still run the store, and my finances I can still manage on my own." Ethan frowned, as if annoyed by my resistance. "Mom, you're not getting any younger. Your health will decline as you get older. We just want you to get better care. If you don't trust us, who can you trust?" It was an emotional appeal, the maternal love that had been my anchor in my lonely years. But instead of softening me, it stirred a vague fear in me. "I can take care of myself," I replied, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Lila immediately interrupted, her fake smile carefully practiced. "Mom, we're just thinking about you. If you give Ethan the power to manage your finances, I believe he'll help you invest and make money, so you can truly enjoy your old age." "Invest?" I repeated, my eyes never leaving her face. "Ethan just lost his job. What do you have to invest? Or do you want my money to make up for your financial failures?" The room froze for a moment. Ethan looked at me, his face dark, and Lila froze, then regained her frightening composure. "What a strange thing to say," she said softly, but her eyes were cold and sharp. "We really want to help you. Please don't think so badly of us." I was torn between the heart of a mother who loved her child unconditionally and the vague but aching feeling that I was being betrayed. I wanted to believe that Ethan, the son I had devoted my life to loving and protecting, was genuinely worried about his mother. But every look, every expression, and even their unusual eagerness, all of it was setting off alarm bells. I looked deep into Ethan's eyes, searching for some glimmer of sincerity, but his face was cold, expressionless, like a wall of indifference. The silence between us was suffocating. In the end, I had to choose not to blow it all up right then. I needed time. I needed to figure out what they really wanted. "I'll think about it," I said softly, my voice dropping. "You guys go ahead. I need to think things over." Ethan and Lila looked at each other, seemingly unable to hide their disappointment. But in a split second, they stood up. "Yes, think about it, Mom. Everything we say is for you," Lila said, still in her honeyed voice. They turned and walked away slowly, the door closing behind them, leaving a gaping silence. I sank into my chair, my heart pounding, exhaustion spreading through my body. The words still rang in my ears. Lila's icy gaze burned into my mind. I told myself to stay alert. I couldn't let myself be taken advantage of. I had to protect myself and what Henry and I had built over our lives. My intuition, the thing that had saved me from so many storms, was now stronger than ever. The suspicion was no longer a vague hunch, but a clear wake-up call. I had to act before it was too late. One morning, I walked into Henry's bedroom, not because I was looking for anything specific, but because there was a silent urge to return there. The room seemed to be frozen in time, still quiet and cozy, as if Henry had just left somewhere and would return soon. The gentle scent of sandalwood still lingered in the air, a familiar scent that had blended into the rhythm of the house and into me like a memory that would never fade. I intended to find some old photos, a memory between me and Henry to flip through the old days, but then my eyes stopped at the bookshelf, where the ebony box that Henry had given me on our 20th wedding anniversary was placed. That box was not just a piece of jewelry, but a treasure trove that held the most precious memories of my life. I clearly remembered the pearl necklace he had carefully chosen, the tiny diamond ring he had silently given me on a sunset-colored afternoon by the lake. The things in that box, Each and every one are symbols of love and unrepeatable days. But as my hand reached out to touch the memory, a cold jolt ran down my spine. The box, was gone. My heart pounded in my chest. I rummaged through the shelves, knelt under the bed, searched every corner, to no avail. The box no longer there. Panic surged through me like a sudden tide. Who could have taken it? I was sure I hadn't moved it. And Henry was gone. All that remained in my mind was a name, Ethan. A memory flashed through my mind, as clear as a slow-motion movie. 2 weeks ago, Ethan had come to visit me. He had said he needed to borrow some old things from the store to fix up his new apartment. I had not suspected anything. I was even happy to help. But now I remembered the way he had avoided my gaze whenever I looked directly at him. His movements had been confused and hurried, things I had dismissed as just being busy with work. But now the pieces began to fit together, forming a cold picture. The pain of betrayal twisted inside me, so deep that it felt like someone had just slashed my heart. Ethan, my own child, the one who had fallen asleep on my shoulder during his first fevers, had quietly stolen the most sacred keepsake, the keepsake of the father he had affectionately called Dad. Tears fell from my eyes, each drop heavy, but behind those tears came another wave, anger. An anger that was not impulsive, but cold, deep, and burning in my chest. I could not let this pass as if it had never happened. I rummaged through Henry's old filing cabinet, where he kept his important papers. Henry was a meticulous man, and his things were always as neat as time itself. I flipped through the files, and then I found a small, crumpled receipt, an anomaly among the old papers. It was from a pawn shop in a nearby town, a place I had never been. The date on the receipt was exactly a week ago, the same as Ethan's visit, and the item description read, "Ebony box with carved patterns containing old jewelry." My hands trembled as I read the words. The amount was a pittance, a price that was not worth paying for any of the items in the box, let alone all the memories packed inside. Ethan had sold his father's keepsake, a sacred gift that Henry and I had treasured, for a few pennies. This betrayal was more than a terrible act. It was a blow to love, to everything I held dear. It was the biggest breach of trust I had ever held in my son. Pain coursed through my body. I had thought I was prepared for Ethan's distance, for the coldness he was showing. But I had never imagined that my son would betray me like this, silently, blatantly, and without explanation. All the doubts I had tried to push aside were now undeniable proof. But in the depths of my despair, something else was stirring inside me. It wasn't just anger, it was determination, a strange force, as if from the deepest part of my soul, was forcing me to stand up. I wouldn't let anyone, not even the son I'd once given my heart to, invade my life, destroy Henry's legacy. The box was gone, but I still had my dignity, Thorne's home essentials, and myself. I had to protect what was left. It was time to stand up, not just for myself, but for Henry, for our love, and for what I'd worked so hard to preserve. I wouldn't back down, not again. The feeling of betrayal still haunted me like a shadow, but this time it didn't paralyze me. Instead, a new resolve emerged, strong and clear. I had to stand up for myself. I knew I couldn't face Ethan and Lila alone. I needed someone by my side, an ally trustworthy, wise, and experienced enough to guide me through this storm. And the first name that came to mind was Clara Mitchell. Clara, a retired lawyer, shrewd, thoughtful, and compassionate, was Henry's lifelong confidant. I still remember the afternoons we spent together on the porch, drinking tea and chatting endlessly about everything from thrilling court cases to the crop to the price of peanuts. Henry once said, "Clara is the smartest woman I've ever known," and I never once doubted it. I drove straight to Clara's old wooden house, nestled in a row of maple trees on the edge of town. When the oak door opened, Clara appeared with a warm smile and sharp eyes. She stared at me, her brows furrowed as if she could read the unease on my face. "Winnie, you're here early. What's got you so upset?" Her voice was calm as always. We sat down on a wool-covered armchair in the sunlit living room. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to tell her everything, from Ethan and Lila's desire to retire and hand over the finances to the sudden disappearance of Henry's jewelry box and the pawn receipt in the drawer. When I got to the part about Ethan taking his father's priceless keepsake for a few pennies, my throat tightened and tears welled up uncontrollably. Clara sat silently, listening as if every word I said were an important piece in the bigger picture. When the story ended, Clara frowned, her eyes turning serious. "Winnie," she said, her voice hard, "power of attorney is no game. Once you give it to Ethan, you lose control of everything. If he's not honest, you lose everything, not just your money, but your control of your life." Clara's words were like a cold knife cutting through the fog in my head. She was right. I had trusted Ethan too much, had been too soft on motherhood, and had ignored the obvious warning signs. "So, what should I do?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "I don't want to lose everything, but I don't want to hurt my child either." Clara looked at me, her eyes sympathetic but not weak. "You're not hurting him, Winnie. You're protecting yourself. This is a time for intelligence, not weakness. We're not going to act on impulse. You need a plan." She began to strategize. "First, sign a temporary power of attorney with conditions and limitations. Make it seem like they've achieved their goal, but you're still in control. Also, have your lawyer, or you, set up a system of account monitoring. Any transactions that exceed a predetermined amount will require your approval. Most importantly, the power of attorney must have a provision that allows you to revoke it at any time." I nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. "I will do as you say." Clara continued, her voice even but determined. "Next, start recording everything suspicious, from words, actions to requests for money. Every detail can be useful evidence." She also advised me to report the missing jewelry box to the police, but I hesitated. I wasn't ready to take my son to court yet. "I can't. I want to give him one last chance, at least to understand what he's thinking." Clara sighed, not rushing. "Then go at your own pace. But remember, gathering evidence is key. When the time comes, you'll need everything ready. And remember, I'm here, by your side." Leaving Clara's house, I felt like I had crossed a threshold. I had a friend, a plan, and a light to guide me. The pain was still there, but it no longer weighed on me like it had before. I knew what I had to do. I would protect what was mine, not just my wealth, but the honor and love that Henry had left me. I would not turn away from the truth, no matter how cruel it was. After that fateful conversation with Clara, a conversation that woke me up like someone who had just stepped out of a long dream, I quietly began a new journey, step by step, cautiously, like someone walking along the edge of a cliff in the dark, where one wrong step could lead to the abyss. I signed a temporary power of attorney for Ethan, with strict terms and strict obligations, which I believed would temporarily make him and Lila let down their guard. At the same time, I quietly went to the bank and requested that the automatic alert system for any transaction exceeding the allowed threshold be activated. In my mind, life at this moment was no different from a life or death game, and I was forced to be the one to go first, even against my maternal instinct. Just a few days later, my phone buzzed, a text from my bank. My heart pounded as I saw the notification, a withdrawal of $10,000. From Ethan. Reason? To purchase new equipment for the store. I almost dropped the phone. $10,000. For a small family-owned store like Thorne's Home Essentials, that wasn't an investment. It was a bust. I called Ethan immediately, trying to calm my voice. I asked, Ethan, I just got a notification about a $10,000 withdrawal. Can you explain this to me? He seemed momentarily surprised, but quickly regained his composure. Oh, Mom, I was going to tell you later. I invested in some new technology for the store, more advanced machinery to improve productivity. We have to innovate so we don't fall behind, you know. If I hadn't run this shop for more than 3 decades, I would have nodded, but I knew every inch of it. The shop didn't need any fancy equipment, at least not at a time like this. And most importantly, why hadn't he told me? What kind of equipment is so expensive, Ethan? I asked, my suspicion evident in my voice. And why did you withdraw the money without talking to me? The annoyance was starting to show in his response. Mom, I'm doing this for the future of the store. Why can't you trust me? I'm your son. She used her motherly love as a shield again, but this time I was not so easily swayed. I was still reeling from the discovery that Henry's jewelry box had been stolen. Ethan, I disagree with that transaction. You must return the money to your account. From now on, any spending over $500 must be approved directly by me. There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. Then Ethan's voice rang out, cold as stone. Are you doubting me? I didn't hesitate. You're protecting what's yours, I replied firmly. That's the clear limit of the temporary trust. I can't withdraw the money without your consent. The call ended in a tense atmosphere, but I knew I couldn't back down. I went back to the bank that day and asked for even tighter safeguards. Any transaction over the threshold would have to be verified by phone or in person. I also installed a transaction alert app on my phone, as Clara had suggested. I couldn't afford to be in the dark any longer. And then the pieces began to fall into place. The tens of thousands of dollars withdrawn, the forced explanation, Ethan's change in attitude. It was as if they were unmasking a deeper plot, not just petty cash, but a deliberate plan to take everything I had. I was cold as I realized it. The truth now was more brutal than the pain I'd felt. But I was ready. I would enter this battle with my eyes wide open and my heart steeled. There is little to see in Maplewood, a quietness that hides anything. Here, untold stories often drift by amid the stirring of spoons and averted glances. The street corner coffee shop is where secrets seem to find themselves, hidden in the smell of roasted coffee and the warm smoke that curls around weary souls. That afternoon, after closing the shop, I stopped in for a hot cup of coffee to ward off the chill that was creeping into my bones during the late autumn days. I chose a spot hidden behind a pot of dense green leaves, hoping to find some peace before returning to a house now filled with doubt and uncertainty. I had barely sat down, barely raising my coffee cup to my lips, when a familiar voice suddenly rang out from the table across from me. It was Ethan and Lila. My heart stopped for a moment. They were talking, their voices low and even, but I could still hear every word clearly. I quickly lowered my head, pretending to read a crumpled old newspaper, but my ears perked up, like a wild animal smelling danger. Is everything ready, Ethan? Lila asked impatiently. Your mother? She's so stubborn. I don't think she'll listen easily. Ethan let out a long breath, a mixture of exhaustion and irritation. Don't worry, she signed a trust, at least temporarily. Now we just need a good excuse to drain her savings. $60,000 is no joke. $60,000! A chill ran down my spine. They were after all the money I had saved my entire life. A mixture of fear and anger flared in my chest like a fire licking at my veins. What about the store? Lila's voice was thick with desire. You said you were going to sell it to fund our big plan. Yes, but the store is in Mom's name. That's more complicated. We need to prove that she's no longer capable of managing her assets. And that's why we need a doctor. What doctor? Her voice was full of doubt. Robert Klein, Ethan said softly, an old acquaintance of mine. He's willing to write a fake medical report saying mom has dementia or early stage Alzheimer's. With that report and a trust, we can easily get her into some cheap nursing home and have complete control over her estate. Every word they spoke was like a sharp knife stabbing at my heart. Cheap nursing home? Fake medical reports? It wasn't just about the money. They wanted to imprison me, strip me of my autonomy, and dismiss me from my own life like an obsolete commodity. I couldn't believe my ears. My son, the son I'd held in my arms during his first fevers, could sit there, calmly plotting such a cold plan. What I had sensed was no longer suspicion. It was a real, deliberate, and vicious plot. My hands were shaking so much that a few drops of coffee spilled over the rim of my cup and soaked the table. I took deep breaths to calm myself, to not give away any openings. I had to do something. I couldn't let them continue this drama. The anger inside me rose like a wave, washing away the pain and replacing it with a fiery determination. I sat motionless, my eyes glued to the newspaper, but my mind was on tenterhooks. The doctor's name, the money, the intention to sell the store, the nursing home. Each word was like a claw in my memory, living proof that I had to remember. I knew full well, if I didn't act now, I would be erased from my own life. This was no longer about money, it was about dignity and freedom. I would not let them turn me into a lunatic, relegated to the margins of society. I would fight, not just for myself, but for all the old people who had been overlooked. It wasn't the yelling or the insults, but the calm voices of Ethan and Lila in the cafe that broke me. As if the cruelest betrayals always come in the gentlest of disguises. They didn't kill me outright, but they left deep wounds, both painful and strangely sobering. In the midst of that pain, something inside me awoke. No longer a tolerance, but a new will, stronger than ever. This was no time to be soft. I needed to act decisively, without hesitation. The next morning, I drove to the next town, where there was an electronics store I had visited years ago. I picked up a small, ingenious tape recorder, small enough to hide in my pocket without arousing suspicion. Back home, I spent the afternoon practicing how to use it, turning it on and off in one motion without a sound. It would be my silent weapon, silent but undeniable evidence. The next meeting with Ethan took place in my living room, the place that had once been the family's cozy den. I was well prepared. The tape recorder was already on, sitting quietly in the jacket pocket hanging on the back of the chair. Ethan walked in, wearing the familiar, eager face, the clever but obvious gaze. He began to talk, the same old refrain about upgrading the store, but this time I was no longer listening with my emotional ears. Look, Mom, the store is too old. I just need to add a little more, buy new merchandise, fix the shelves, and especially invest in an online sales system. Everyone buys online these days, Mom. His voice sounded confident, the kind of confidence that manipulators use to gain trust. I nodded, trying to sound interested. Really? That makes sense. But how much do you need? Like I said, I don't have much cash on hand. Ethan's eyes lit up, the hope that came with getting what he wanted. Just another 20,000, Mom. That's all it takes to turn the store into a modern, classy place. $20,000? I raised my eyebrows, feigning surprise. Why do you need so much? Don't worry, Mom. Ethan quickly soothed her. I've calculated everything. This is a surefire investment. You won't regret it. I'll make you rich. I looked into his eyes, hoping to find a trace of remorse, or at least sincerity, but all I saw was calculation, smooth as the surface of a cold coin. I nodded slowly, as if convinced. Yeah, let me think about it. Get the papers ready. Ethan left with an air of undisguised satisfaction. Little did he know that every word, every breath, had been accurately recorded in that tiny machine. As soon as the door closed behind him, I called the bank. I explained everything, without beating around the bush, about my fear that my own son was taking advantage of me, about the trust I feared he might misuse. I asked them to increase the security of my account, specifically to block any large transactions without my direct approval, either by signature or personal security code. The bank staff listened, their voices gentle and sympathetic. They assured me no money would be transferred without my explicit consent. I didn't stop there. That day, I searched through every file in my closet, from tax returns to corporate contracts. I needed to confirm what I had a hunch. I was still the owner of Thorne's Home Essentials. And sure enough, the legal documents were clear. The LLC was in my name as sole owner. Ethan couldn't change anything without my signature, much less sell it or borrow against the store. A wave of relief washed over me. The most precious asset Henry and I had built up was, at least, still in my hands. I sat down in my chair, feeling a quiet strength growing inside me. I had proof. I had struck first. I was no longer the weak mother who had turned a blind eye. I was ready to defend myself and the legacy I could not let anyone take away. After a tense conversation with Ethan, I knew that the moment of direct confrontation was not far away. I had prepared myself mentally, but I did not expect it to come so quickly. One morning, Ethan called with unusual enthusiasm. Mom, I have invited a very good doctor, an old friend of mine. He will come to your house to give you a general checkup. You know, I just want the best care for you. Just hearing the word doctor sent my mind racing back to Ethan and Lila's conversation in the coffee shop, where they discussed a fake medical report to declare me incapacitated. My heart sank silently, but I kept my voice steady. Oh, good. When is he coming? This afternoon, Mom. I've arranged everything. Don't worry, it's just a routine checkup. I understood the test had come. I was ready. I charged the small recorder, placed it discreetly in the pocket of the jacket I was going to wear. At the same time, I rehearsed the most incisive answers to the questions that might be asked, to prove beyond doubt my sanity and sanity. That afternoon, Ethan returned with a middle-aged man in a white coat. Hello, Mom. This is Dr. Robert Klein, my friend. He will check your health, Ethan said, his face filled with satisfaction. I greeted Dr. Klein politely, but my eyes silently studied his every move. He sat across from me, holding a clipboard. He began asking simple questions about my health and daily routine. I answered them clearly and concisely, without showing any hesitation. Then he moved on to the more difficult part, perception and memory. What day, month, and year is it, Winnie? Today is November 17th, 2023, I replied without thinking. Can you tell me about some memorable events in your life, like your wedding day, or when you opened your shop? I smiled and began to tell the story as vividly as my memory would allow. The days with Henry, the years of struggling to build the store, the first customers. I listed every detail, their names and their favorite items. Dr. Klein listened intently, glancing occasionally at Ethan, whose expression was beginning to waver. Ethan, who was sitting next to me, was starting to lose his patience. He kept interrupting me, trying to steer the conversation away. Mom, you've told me too much. The doctor only needs to hear the basics. But Dr. Klein seemed to ignore the interruption. He continued with more difficult questions, asking me to solve simple math problems and reason logically. I solved them all, not only correctly, but also with clear, coherent arguments. At this moment, I could feel the change in his eyes. He turned to Ethan, his voice somewhat cold. Mr. Ethan, in my opinion, your mother is completely conscious. She has a very good memory, and her cognitive ability is also perfect. She is completely capable of making her own decisions. Ethan's face paled. No way! You need to check more carefully. Maybe my mother is hiding something. Just the other day, she forgot where she put her keys. Ethan's voice was quiet, but I heard it clearly, and so did the recorder. Mr. Klein, remember what I told you? I paid for another copy of the report. Dr. Klein looked at Ethan with annoyance. I'm a doctor, not a signature seller. I can't fake a diagnosis for money. Winnie is perfectly normal. Ethan stood up angrily. You will regret it. He dragged Dr. Klein out, the sound of arguing echoing down the hallway. I smiled, a real smile. I had made it. I had proven myself sane. More importantly, I had recorded the entire conversation, including Ethan's priceless whisper. It was the proof I needed. I knew their plan was in jeopardy, and I couldn't wait any longer. It was time to strike. The pride that had followed the confrontation with Dr. Klein and Ethan was like a thin ray of sunlight at the end of the day, a glimpse that was quickly swallowed by the ensuing darkness. The next morning, the real blow came, not via automated text or soulless email, but a direct call from the deep voice of the branch manager, his voice thick with barely concealed tension. His tone was serious and urgent. Ms. Thorne, we have discovered an unusual withdrawal from your account. The entire $60,000 in your savings account has been withdrawn. The transaction was made based on a medical report confirming your incapacity and a valid power of attorney, not the temporary one you signed. I felt everything shake. $60,000. They had done it. Ethan and Lila, they had succeeded in part. They had not only falsified the medical report, but had used it to take my life's savings. A rage so fierce it overcame my fear. This was no time to hesitate. I'll go to the bank right away, I said without hesitation. Make sure not another penny is taken from my account. I immediately called Clara Mitchell. Clara, we have a problem. Ethan and Lila have drained $60,000 with a fake medical report and a fake trust. Clara was silent for a few seconds, then replied, her voice calm but firm. You stay calm. I'll go with you. We'll meet them there. We arrived at the bank in 15 minutes. Ethan and Lila were there, triumphant grins on their faces. They hadn't expected me to arrive so quickly, and they hadn't expected Clara with me. What are you doing here? Ethan asked, trying to sound surprised. But I could read the confusion in his eyes. I didn't answer. I walked straight to the teller, where the bank manager was waiting. I demand that my account be frozen immediately, I said, my voice firm. And I want to see copies of the so-called medical report and the power of attorney that was used to withdraw my money. The manager was taken aback for a moment, but quickly complied. He handed me 2 files. I scanned the report. It said I had severe cognitive impairment and was no longer able to manage my assets. At the bottom was a familiar signature, Robert Klein. This is a blatant forgery. I held up the document, my voice like a sharp knife. Dr. Klein came to my house yesterday, examined me personally, and declared me sane. I have proof. Ethan and Lila were stunned. Lila stammered, her voice trembling. What did you say? Did you make a mistake again? I didn't look at Lila. I turned to the manager. I'm formally requesting that this trust be voided. I have the recording of yesterday's examination, where Ethan was deliberately pressuring Dr. Klein into making a false conclusion. I also have copies of the transaction reports and proof that I never approved any over-the-limit withdrawals. Clara stepped forward, placing her hand lightly on my shoulder. Manager, this is a case of organized financial fraud. My client, Mrs. Winifred Thorne, is completely sane. We are demanding that the bank return all the money that was illegally withdrawn and freeze Ethan Thorne's account while we investigate. Ethan suddenly roared, Are you going to sue me? I am your son. I don't deserve to be your son anymore, I replied, my voice choked with anger and hurt. I betrayed you, lied to you for your money, and even tried to put you in a nursing home. You won't let that go. I turned to Clara. Clara, help me file a complaint. I have all the evidence, recordings, mortgage receipts, bank statements, everything. Ethan and Lila were petrified. Their faces were white. The bank was in an uproar, everyone turning to look. That public confrontation, in front of so many onlookers, had laid it all bare. I knew I had chosen a difficult path, but it was the only path to protect myself. The confrontation at the bank spread through Maplewood like a spark to dry grass. The town was in an uproar, not expecting Ethan, the son of the well-respected Winnie Thorne, to be so ruthless. But the evidence Clara and I had gathered, the recording with Dr. Klein, the pawn receipts, the detailed bank records, was undeniable. The police moved almost immediately. Ethan and Lila were caught leaving Maplewood in a hurry. The car was packed with belongings, a clear sign of an escape plan. When I heard they were handcuffed at the checkpoint at the beginning of town, I felt mixed emotions. Relief that justice had been served, but also a pang of grief for the son I had held in my arms since he was a newborn. The trial was swift. The evidence Clara and I presented was enough to overturn any defense. Ethan was sentenced to 4 years in prison for fraud and forgery. Lila, as an accomplice, was sentenced to 2 years of local probation. The judge also ordered us both to repay the entire $60,000 in my account, plus interest. When the verdict was announced, I felt neither joy nor relief. Instead, a silent void opened up inside me. I had gotten my money back, yes, but the price I had to pay was a deep cut in our blood relationship. Even if Ethan had betrayed me, even if he had been cold and calculating, he was still my son. And that was what made the pain so intense that no words could describe it. I had dreamed of a peaceful home where I would grow old with the laughter of my children and grandchildren. Now that dream had fallen into pieces. A few weeks after the trial, I received a letter from prison. Ethan's familiar handwriting on the envelope made my heart clench. I held the letter, my hands shaking, my eyes staring at the sealed edge. I hesitated, and finally opened it. The words appeared like knives carved into his chest. No apology, no remorse, just blame. Ethan blamed me for being too harsh, too stingy, and that I had robbed him of his chance to make it big. He wrote that I was the one who ruined his life, the one who never trusted or sacrificed for his children. I folded the letter as tears streamed down my cheeks without realizing it. Deep down, I had held on to a fragile hope that Ethan would wake up, realize his sins, and find a way to turn around. But that letter was like the end of all hope. It was still sliding into selfishness and illusion. I stuffed the letter into a drawer, buried deep in a corner of the closet that I knew I would never want to open. I chose silence. I chose to let go. There are relationships that, if you continue to hold on to, will only make the wound never heal. Justice has been served, but in my heart, something sacred has forever disappeared. After all the events, I suddenly realized that my life needed a new direction, a rebirth from the ashes. The pain of losing my only son still burned like a slow burn under my skin, but I couldn't let it consume the rest of my life. In the long days after the trial, I quietly reminisced about the years of raising Ethan. Every meal, every lesson, every missed time, because I was busy at the store. I wondered where I had gone wrong. Was I too lenient, or on the contrary, too strict? Hundreds of questions kept swirling around, but in the end, I understood that tormenting myself wouldn't change the past. Ethan was an adult, and he had to bear the consequences of his wrong choices. I couldn't turn back time, but I could learn to move forward with the feet of someone who had been soaked in loss. One sunny afternoon, as I sat behind the counter in the store, watching Sarah, the diligent assistant, stacking shelves with a focused gaze, an idea suddenly flashed in my mind. Sarah had been with the store for over a decade, silently, loyally, and without asking for anything. She loved this place like it was her second home, maybe even more. I could feel it in her every gesture, in the way she brushed away each layer of dust, greeted each customer, and treasured each tiny item. I called Sarah over softly. "Sarah, how long have you been working here?" She smiled, her eyes sparkling with surprise. "Yes, more than 10 years, Winnie." "And do you love this store?" Sarah paused for a brief moment, then nodded, sincerely. "Yes, I do. This is where I feel like I belong." I nodded, determined. "Then I would like to offer you 30% of Thorne's home essentials." Sarah's eyes widened, as if she had misheard. "Miss Winnie, are you serious?" "I have never said anything more certain. You have been an indispensable part of this place, and I want you to truly become a part of this place, not just in labor, but in rights." Sarah burst into tears. She hugged me, hot tears falling on my shoulder in an unspoken gratitude. It was a strangely warm moment, as if in this broken world, I could still believe in loyalty and genuine commitment. The shares were not just a worthy reward, but also a way for me to pass on my legacy, lighten my burden, and reclaim some living space for myself. I began to think about the dreams I had cherished and then buried for the sake of making a living. Henry and I had dreamed of going to Italy, walking in the sunset of Venice, drinking coffee on the sidewalks of Florence, wandering the alleys of Rome. That dream had been forgotten amid bills and deliveries, but now I saw it come alive, dreamy and beautiful like an ancient painting. I spent time researching tours, reopening old postcards that Henry had kept. In my imagination, I saw myself walking down medieval cobblestone streets, enjoying the aroma of fresh-baked bread, listening to melodious music in the bustling square. The thought, though fragile, lit up an indescribable joy in me, like a glimmer of light after a long period of darkness. I've come to realize that despite losing my relationship with Ethan, I still have a lot of things that are precious. I have Thorne's home essentials, the love and sweat of my life and Henry's, now held together by Sarah. I have loyal friends like Clara, who have pulled me out of the abyss with her lucidity and warmth. And most of all, I have myself, an imperfect woman, but one who has stood firm through many storms. I can find joy in my work, in my healing journey, and in reliving my old dreams. Life is still big and forgiving, and I will not let the past hold me captive forever. It's time to live, not for anyone else, but for myself. The trip to Italy sparked a quiet but powerful transformation in me. Every ancient cobblestone street, every fresco glowing in golden light, and every dish steeped in traditional flavors seemed to awaken long dormant emotional regions within me. I stood before the magnificent Colosseum, whispered a wish as I tossed a coin into the Trevi fountain, and wandered through the flower-filled alleys of Florence, as if living in a real dream. There I touched the breath of history, felt the deep romance in the rhythm of life, and realized that this world was worth loving. When I returned to Maplewood, I was no longer the Winnie of those gloomy days. I brought with me a new vitality, a different outlook on life. Thorne's Home Essentials is also entering a new era. Sarah, with incredible dedication and adaptability, has taken the initiative to set up an online store for the store. Customers are no longer confined to our small town, but are coming from all over, thanks to the convenience of technology. However, we still maintain the intimate, sophisticated service that has made the store's identity. Sarah coordinates most of the online orders, and I still enjoy being at the counter, chatting with regulars, advising newcomers, and tending to every corner. The store is still my heart, but now it beats farther than I ever imagined. One of the most profound changes I experienced after that journey was joining a support group for seniors who had been victims of fraud. It was not loud, not pompous, just a small circle of broken hearts trying to heal. As I told my story about Ethan, about Lila, about seemingly irreparable losses, I was met with quiet, sympathetic glances, slow nods from people who had gone through the pain. I was no longer alone. Sharing was not just a way to release, but also an act of healing. I realized that my seemingly bitter experiences could be a wake-up call for someone who was teetering. I could help them recognize the danger signs, guide them on how to keep themselves safe in an increasingly complex world. After each group meeting, I felt a little stronger. Facing the truth, however raw and painful, was the first step toward freedom from it. I learned to forgive, not Ethan, but myself, for my motherly blindness, for the illusions I had grown up with in silence, and for the cuts I had made by holding on to something that had long since rotted. Now I no longer carry regrets in my heart like a heavy suitcase. Instead, I look to the future with a calm gaze and a heart full of hope. I begin to sketch out my next itinerary, a trip to Japan. I want to immerse myself in the slowly falling cherry blossoms in the spring, stroll through the ancient streets of Kyoto, and taste the exquisite flavors of Japanese cuisine. Just thinking about it makes my heart flutter, as if youth has just come and knocked gently on the door of my heart. After all the ups and downs, I understand that I have entered a new chapter in my life, a chapter no longer filled with tears, but filled with strength, freedom, and gratitude. I have learned that it is never too late to stand up, to protect myself, to receive happiness without begging. Even though I was betrayed by my own flesh and blood, I can still walk, head held high, with pride no longer bound by the old hurt. That journey has taught me many things, and I know I am still continuing it, with a heart that has learned to love again and a soul that has learned to heal itself. Thank you for listening to my story.